I want to say something about children, and I mean by children anywhere from 2 years old or so, whenever they're starting to speak, through to the end of primary school. And it's important to remember that when parents are worried and stressed and upset, the children are going to be very tuned into this. In some families they'll talk about it openly, but in other cases they won't know what to say, so they won't say anything. I think it's a really important principle for parents, if they're carrying a lot of emotion, let the kids know about it, but let the kids know about it in a way that doesn't burden the kids. So you tell them, Dad and I are feeling a bit worried about all the process with the storm. It's going to take us a while to sort out. We'll be all right in the long run, and you don't need to worry about it, but we'll be a little bit up and down, but sometimes we'll be a bit grumpy and tired. It's not your fault, but we're just telling you. Because otherwise, because children love their parents, if they don't understand what the source of the problem is, they're ultimately going to say, is it me? And children often feel very responsible for how their parents feel. They don't know what to do about it. And some kids, when they feel like that, will be more difficult because they're worried themselves and they don't know how to manage it. Others will, we notice in disasters, they'll often be very good because they can see mum and dad are under such a tough time, and they won't put their own needs forward, they won't put their own demands. They'll often really struggle for quite a long time. And interestingly, that often means that they put aside their own needs until everything feels normal again, and then when the parents think, well, at last we're through this, suddenly they've got problems with their kids because they bring out all their needs that they've been holding back. So I think to create the opportunity to every now and again just have a talk in the family about what's happening. You might start off with just letting everyone know about we've been talking to the insurance company, we've got a few problems, we'll have to work it out and get information and so on. You don't have to share all of your worries with them. You might say we're a bit worried about it and it's a bit frustrating and we're a bit tired at the moment. And if you do that in a positive frame of mind, which might include, for instance, saying, I'm sorry I've been yelling at you and being grumpy and so on, then that becomes the baseline, that moment of sharing when you are in control. And that's very reassuring to the children, because you're talking about when you lose control from point of being in control. And you're saying that's not the important part of the relationship, this is the important part that I'm telling you about now. Creating every now and again opportunities for the children to say what they think is going on. So what do you think about it? You heard Dad and I talking on the phone yesterday, what did you think was going on? Never assume that they don't hear what's being talked about, is my experience. Even if mum and dad are talking or maybe having a disagreement after they've supposedly gone to sleep, never assume they haven't somehow picked up on it. They won't necessarily tell you. You don't need to share it all with them, but you can say, look, Dad and I are a bit grumpy with each other and so on, but we're talking about it, we'll be okay. I know that there are some people after disasters who've been struggling. Some mothers have told me when they feel absolutely over it, they say, I'm just going to go and be in my room. They go in their room and have a bit of a cry, and they come out and the kids can see they've been crying, but they've been watching TV, and mum says, I'm feeling better now, thanks. And what would you like for dinner? So what it's showing is that I can keep the routine going. And now that's enormously reassuring to kids and gives them that security. For children, the routines are such an anchor for their security. And even if you're in temporary accommodation, even if you have to move from one place to another, to actually anchor the day in simple routines for the things you can make routines for. And when you move somewhere, start to build a routine for them. It's very important. There's something that's absolutely universal with families under stress. And it's best to describe it this way. The children, if they've been through the experience, will have also had very confusing and frightening experiences. Unlike adults who can say, when I heard the tree coming down, I thought this. Children often can't say what was going through their mind. And you might, if you come back to that idea that somebody who thinks they might be going to die has had a really serious trauma, and they need to process that and find out why they didn't have the outcome they thought. And I think the same is with children, but particularly the younger children won't have the self-awareness to say what's going on in their mind. But what you might pick it up with is play. If they play, little preschool kids playing with great big things, it doesn't have to be a tree falling on a bedroom, but it might be, I don't know, a plane crashing on a cow in the paddock, or it's the theme of something unexpected. It's all nice, but then something goes wrong, or building a house that then falls down. Just that theme of sudden crashing. And sometimes you can do something as simple as to say, looks like there's lots of crashing and banging going on here. Is that like how it was for you in the storm? Just to make that little link and see what comes. And very often kids will say, yeah, I was scared too. And that opens up an opportunity to talk. And again, the same principle I mentioned for adults applies, that if in talking about it a child gets upset, that's very good, because they're releasing some of the emotion. And as a parent, we just need to stay with it, take them through it. If we show that we're confident and in control and calm, then we make it safe for them to share what's on their mind. If we get agitated, they'll protect us, and they won't really share it. Now, when they're carrying these kind of worries or feelings, or even just the sympathy with their parents and the worries, they've got a big load, a big emotional load, depending on their age and their ease of communication. They might be able to share it, or they might not. They've got this big load. Now, if we think that every year a child is moving into a new stage of development, new skills, new responsibilities, new talents, new patterns, becoming more independent, the developmental process is powered by excitement, interest, wanting to be grown up, wanting to be like other people. There's got to be an energy source to actually keep moving out of your comfort zone into new stages of development. Every new year is full of a whole lot of new issues. Just being in the peer group is quite a challenging thing, dealing with all those little problems. So for healthy development, you need this source of energy. And when children are burdened by worries about their parents, or worried about what happened, or carrying fears, they no longer feel confident to go to sleep in the dark, they are worried about the wind blowing, anything, triggers will be there for them, then actually the developmental process is a bit too much for them to move into the next phase. And there's a universal tendency in children for them to actually go back to a stage of development where they've achieved all the goals, they've developed all the skills, they've got all the talents. They don't need to worry about it. It's all easy. Now, if they go back to that stage, they free up a lot of energy, don't they? They free up a lot of emotional energy to actually deal with these big problems. And the word we use to describe that is regression. Regression means I've gone back to an earlier stage in development. We adults do it too, don't we? we want to stay in bed and have someone bring us toast and tea because we just don't feel the getting up for the day and the responsibilities. And this principle of regression is often confusing with parents because they're not going to understand the reason. They're going to just see that my child was responsible and doing his homework and doing the washing up and taking the dog for a walk, and now he's just not wanting to do any of it. He's sitting in front of TV and just vegetating and not doing anything. And the temptation is to get stuck into them, you know. Just because we've had a house fall on a tree fall on the house doesn't mean you can't get on with your home. Now get on with it. We've all got enough worries of our own, without understanding that it's actually all the worries that are actually making them feel it's a little bit too hard. Now, you know, psychologists who work with kids have understood this and learned how to work with this. And the principle is this, that if they've gone back to an earlier stage, then there's a reason for it. And the reason is to go back to where it's easy to actually free up the energy to cope. Therefore, if you allow them to go back there in a constructive way, so you don't hold all of the expectations of them being let's say, a 9-year-old, and maybe they're behaving a bit like they were 7 or 8, like they were very early primary school instead of halfway through. And then you let them be there, but actually try and make that constructive and give them maybe modified responsibilities around the house. Or talk with the school, and maybe if they can't manage to do any homework, you actually ask for a bit of easy homework to just start to rebuild the homework routine and make it easy and fun because they're doing things that they can do easily. And then slowly come back into it. Because what we find is if we allow the regression and then we give the emotional support there, and that's where I'd be asking, you know, do we need to talk to the kids about the fact that mum and dad have been bickering and fighting a bit because they're stressed? And have they heard talk about insurance companies and financial problems and loans? Do they need to be given some simple information so they can actually let it go and not worry about it? There may be various things we need to do to address the worries they've got. And then what will give them energy is fun, enjoyment, achievement, getting out, and pay particular attention on the weekends to making time available to just have fun as a family together. And that'll nourish them. And we'll see that as soon as the kids are able, they move back, not to where they were, but to where they should be. So if it wouldn't be surprising for you know, kids in this year, if we say it was last June, they had a pretty tough time up till Christmas, and of course we've got COVID here that scrambles the whole picture, but then they've had this tiring time during the first half of this year coming up to the winter. They're going to have the same kind of worries about triggers and so on, so it's important to talk to them. And you might find that they're going to be looking a bit regressed as they head into that winter time when they've, you know, a bit anxious about it. So take it easy with them, allow them that bit of extra time, give them a bit more support and reassurance and nourishment as you would have if they were a couple of years younger. And then you'll find that when they come out the other end, they will actually jump forward in a way that shows that they're on their track. And so it's very important for parents and teachers, anyone who's responsible for kids, to understand that principle of regression, because if we don't respect it, we overload them. They've noticed in the United States, when they've done research, is that one of the factors that predicts poorer mental health in kids several years down the track after a big hurricane or whatever they have there is not being able to regress, being prohibited from regression, and being told they've got to measure up and do what's responsible. Just as for us adults, I think we need to allow ourselves to regress, to sort of let a few things go, tell our family and friends we're not going to do so much social life, we just need time to ourselves. So the anchor for the children will be their routines and the quality of their relationship. And if there's one piece of advice I give to parents who are in recovery from a natural disaster, is I know you've got more than you can possibly manage to do, but what we don't want is for the kids' development to be put off track, because that'll have longer term implications. So a good way to cull development is try to organise a routine where regularly, as a family, you can just give your children your full and undivided attention for whatever you can manage, an hour, or half a day or something. Just be with them and see what happens, because they will then start to tune into that interest and that attention, and then the conversations will flow. Maybe not the first time, but if you do it routinely, you'll find they'll start to enjoy this opportunity just to be together. And that's where you'll find out where the issues are that you need to deal with. I'd like to say a bit about teenagers. What's important about teenagers is that it's the period where the young people are moving towards independence. They long for independence, but at the same time feel it's a bit overpowering. Some will want to leap into it and let everything go, others will be holding back. And you'll know what your child is like. Some want to spend all their time with their peers. Some are finding the peer group really challenging to be involved in. And one of the things that can happen is that the balance between home life and peer group changes. Because if we go back to the same principle I've mentioned for primary school children, is that the teenagers too are burdened and worried. They're worried about their parents, and becomes even more important to talk to them about what they'll be hearing in the phone calls and the chats when supposedly they're asleep, or supposedly you think they're not listening because they've got something in their ears. They'll be picking it up. And so it's really important to make sure at various points you bring them up to date and you give them a clear message about the problems from a position of strength and a position of, I've got a lot of worries, but we're adults, we're dealing with it, we're going to get help, and we're not sure yet, but we'll get there, etc. Give them that optimism. These positive attitudes, when you're in a state where you can do that, share them with the kids so that they compensate for the times when you're upset and unhappy and maybe you lose it from time to time. And then think about it this way, that they have to keep going with these challenges to move into an independence. There'll be some kids who want to escape the tensions at home and they want to go into the peer group at a time when the parents are worried and want to bring their children close. I think that's often a dynamic that creates tensions. The teenager wants to spend all their time with their friends and the parent wants them to come back. In my experience, it's, if you can avoid it, better not to go up against the peer group, because I notice the parents usually lose. And rather encourage the young person to talk about their friends. Be interested, want to meet them. Because sometimes parents are not too sure who these kids are that their young person is hanging out with. Get to know them, invite them to bring them home, maybe turn on a barbecue or something. Try to make sure that there's not a separation between the family and the peer group. They can move in and out. In that way, if your young person has been responsible and reliable and so on, and you feel you've got a reasonable connection with them before the events happen, even if they're spending a lot more time with people you don't know too well, I would say trust them, because it's probably an aspect of the regression. They're in escapist mode, and as soon as the things come through the other side, you'll find that they will start to want to enjoy being in the family more. and try to create this opportunity to have some fun with them at times. Of course, sometimes teenagers don't consider being with the family fun, but an obligation. But sometimes you can find things that they enjoy doing. And for them too, this principle of regression, of going back to an earlier stage where I don't have the same responsibilities, where I'm not worrying about the future, where I can just occupy myself here and now, becomes very important. So as parents, particularly if you wanted help with the young people, you might ask them for help, but then let them regress. Let them maybe not have to do quite so many chores or whatever. As long as they do some things useful, consider you're at least holding that responsibility. And the same would be for study, that sometimes their ability to achieve is reduced. And our experience is that if the young person hasn't got other problems like learning difficulties or whatever, if their grades just fall for a year or so, to just support them in that rather than try to pressure them. Because if their grades have fallen, their minds are not available to them for learning. And so keeping things ticking along, keeping them in touch, and maybe talking with the teachers about being strategic. What are the most important things for them to learn? They're not going to be able to do it all, but what are the key issues they need in order to move through so that next year they can get back on track? Again, the experience is that if kids have been achieving adequately before this period of turmoil, you can expect they will come back to it when they're able to. And that means seeing that keeping the family together, giving attention, having periods of enjoyment even though you've got a lot of problems, and preserving that sense of communication. These are the really important things that will guarantee that they'll get back on track as soon as they're able to.